There we go. All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Crystal Martinez, and I'm the CDFI Program Director at Inclusiv. We are very happy that you all are joining us today during our CDFI Open Office Hour session. This typically is a session that we host every Wednesday, 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And it is typically open for anyone to jump on, ask questions around CDFI specific content. We usually have an opening slide deck where we talk about the CDFI industry and we talk about all things CDFI related. And this session today, it's focused in on what we're calling kind of a deeper dive webinar session that we are hosting for the next, I would say every other week for the next 3 weeks or 4 weeks, where we're going to be talking about very specific content that is relevant for CDFI certification application in reference to the new standards and looking very specifically at particular topics. So for today's session, we are going to be addressing primary mission and accountability. So if you are joining us and you thought today was just the general content, you're in for a special treat because we are going to be focusing in on those two particular topics today and taking that deeper dive. I'm joined with my colleague, Terry Radigan, who is our senior consultant. Just a couple of housekeeping items. If you came in and your mic was off mute, and you're still off mute, please do mute yourself just so we don't get any of the background feedback. If you do have questions, you can come off mute and ask those questions. We're pretty open and flexible around that. Also, just want to note that the chat function is available. So if you have questions as we're going through the presentation portion, feel free to type in the chat what your question is, and we will make sure and get those questions addressed. We typically use the full hour. We may go a few minutes over. So if you do have to hop off at the end of the hour, we will be recording the session and sending it out to folks that registered for today. So you'll have the recorded version in case there's anything that you miss at the end. Or say you throw your question in the chat and we can't get to it before you jump off, we'll try and clarify that question as well too, so it's on the recording. Last bit of housekeeping, because we are talking about two particular topics of CDFI certification, we will be taking a pause as we do the transition to stop recording and then start recording again, because we do like to use these types of recorded sessions for members that have follow-up questions or people that are asking about particular items when it comes to CDFI certification. So we want to capture those in two separate recordings. So just note that we will kind of take a pause in the middle and stop and let's press play again. Terry, if you want to go ahead and start sharing the slide deck, we'll get started on the slides. Also, the chat function, you can throw in your hellos. If you're new to us today during open office hours, feel free to say hi. Let us know where you're coming from. For folks that are on every Wednesday session, thank you for joining us again. And you can feel free to say your hellos as well too in the chat. We love to see where people are calling in from and who's joining us for these sessions. We're going to open this up by just talking, covering a couple pieces about Inclusiv and the national network. Inclusiv's mission is to help low and moderate income people and communities achieve financial independence through credit unions. So our focal point and our focus is consistently on credit unions and how they're supporting communities through the work that they're doing in the financial industry. Next slide. At a glance for Inclusiv, just to give you some kind of top of mind items around what our network looks like. Inclusiv was established and founded in 1974 by a coalition of community development credit unions. Inclusiv was also instrumental in the campaign to establish the CDFI fund. Inclusiv is the only CDFI certified financial intermediary for credit unions. Our network is made up of over 500 credit unions that serve more than 21 million members with 300 billion in combined assets. As a breakdown, 75% are low income designated, 60% are CDFI certified, 30% are minority depository institutions, and 20% of our membership represents cooperativas that are located in Puerto Rico. Next slide. We, as I mentioned, 1974, we are coming up on our 50-year anniversary. So we really do hope that for folks that are on the call today, that you will think about joining us at our 50th annual conference, where we will be celebrating our 50th anniversary. You can find information around the 50th annual conference on our home site, inclusiv.org. There is a banner at the top that you can click on, and it'll take you to the registration page and the schedule of events. We are taking it back home this year during the month of May for this annual conference. So we do hope to see you there in New York, and that you will be joining us May 7th through the 9th. One thing just to highlight, we are doing what we're considering to be a CDFI sandbox that will be held on May 7th. So please do look for the details on that session. It will be about a 3-hour-long session where we'll be diving deeper into all of the things around CDFI and the CDFI standards. So we do hope to see you at the conference. And now at this point, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Terry. Terry's going to kind of walk us through some of the details around this deeper dive. I'll be navigating the chat, so if you do have questions, I'll be looking for your questions throughout the chat, and then also sharing some additional resources and content through the chat function. So I'll hand it over to you, Terry.
Thanks, Chriselle, and happy Wednesday, everybody. Starting this presentation with a little bit of a public service announcement. As Chriselle mentioned, Inclusiv is a certified CDFI, but Inclusiv is not the CDFI fund. So we are not in a position to give official guidance or anything that we say can't override or supersede what the CDFI fund itself says. So we always strongly encourage people to go to the CDFI fund's website. This link, copies of this presentation will have a link directly to the application page for CDFI certification that has a lot of the materials that we'll be talking about today. So including, importantly, the official guidance for the CDFI certification application. So everything that we're talking about today is based on this particular document. You'll see I'll make several references to this document and the frequently asked questions as of February of this year. And it's really important to bear in mind that there are things that the CDFI fund expects to continue to evolve and change. One of the things that we were really happy to see in the new standards was a very clear statement from the CDFI fund that there are areas of the application that they will continue to collect feedback from CDFIs, any potential applicants, currently certified institutions, and expect to continue to make amendments over time. And for credit unions, I think this is of greatest interest in two particular areas around responsible financing standards, which we will be talking about today, and target market assessment methodologies, which we will discuss in greater detail in the office hours devoted to the CDFI fund's target market test. So just to frame, this today we are talking about 2 out of the 7 requirements for CDFI certification, but just to, for everybody always to bear in mind, there are 7 requirements, and all of them are, must be satisfied if you are going to be a certified CDFI. The 3 requirements that we kind of group together and say who you are automatically satisfied by the CDFI fund. I mean, by all chartered credit unions. So, you are all a legal entity, non-governmental entity, and financing entity. The last two, the primary, the target market test, that you primarily serve CDFI target markets and that you provide development services, those we will be talking about again in separate office hours yet to come. Today, we are going to be talking about the middle two, how tests about how you're run. The primary mission test, that you have a primary mission of community development, and the accountability test, that you are accountable to CDFI target markets. So with that, we can dive in. Having a primary mission of community development, this test requires that you have a board-approved mission statement in some form and a community development strategy. That is, and the mission statement must be in place at least 6 months before applying for certification. This primary mission test also requires a confirmation of responsible financing practices. So let's look a little bit deeper at the primary mission test. This was the one requirement that I think it's safe to say the CDFI fund devoted the most energy, the most resources into kind of tearing apart and rebuilding from scratch in the new certification application. Those of you on the call that are already CDFI certified may not have given very much thought to this test when you first applied for certification, because since the beginning of the CDFI fund, the standards always accepted low-income designation of credit unions as sufficient evidence of a primary mission of community development. So for most credit unions, remember I said those first 3 tests are automatic for all credit unions. For most credit unions that have been certified up till this time, there was also a 4th that was pretty much automatic. If you were low income designated, you just automatically got a check box there. There were not very clear standards, even for non-credit union CDFIs, about what it meant to have a primary mission of community development. But the CDFI fund has seen this one requirement, the primary mission test, as critically important to identifying true CDFIs that are eligible for certification and weeding out potential bad actors. So as I mentioned in the summary for this section, it requires the board-approved mission statement and community development strategy. And you want to have these in place at least 6 months before applying for certification. And this test also requires a confirmation of responsible financing practices. Now, I talked about the guidance, and we'll have some other kind of helpful documents that will accompany this presentation when you're looking at it. But again, I do encourage all of you to go to the guidance itself when you're looking specifically at some of the requirements and how they relate to your situation and your credit union. The guidance itself is a very large document. It's over 200 pages, so don't get overwhelmed. The PDF version, the nice thing is, you can go to the table of contents, click on the heading that says primary mission, and it will take you right to the 90th page of the PDF document. That kind of describes what they are looking for in the primary mission. And there are 4 key elements to this test: that you have a board-approved mission statement in some form that describes your primary mission as the promotion of community development, that mission statement has been in place for at least 6 months prior to applying, that you have a board approved community development strategy, and that you meet the CDFI fund's responsible financing practices standards. The guidance gives some fairly specific examples, a pretty good idea of what they are looking for. Examples of promoting community development means, financial products, financial services to the types of CDFI target markets, the kinds of communities and populations that the CDFI fund is primarily interested in. Now, if you don't already have a statement, if you are crafting a statement for the purposes of satisfying this requirement, for your board approval, feel free to incorporate some of this specific language as it applies to your credit union, talking about, CDFI investment areas, low income individuals. If you are serving, perhaps you are a minority depository institution, you can talk about the communities of color that you serve. So there are, little pieces that you can incorporate into a statement of mission that would be approved by your board that makes it very easy for the CDFI fund to, check off their boxes and say, yes, this is what we expect to see as a, statement of purpose, as a mission statement from a CDFI. On page 92, it gets, again, more specific. If you look at the second sentence in here, language that indicates a community development purpose includes references to certain things, as I was just mentioning. So again, you can refer to this, look at the statement that you have and say, are we really giving them what they need? Assuming, that a reader knows nothing about your credit union, will they get from this statement that, the governing board has endorsed a mission of community development that is consistent with CDFI certification? The document must indicate the date that it was approved by the board. If it is not clear from the documentation, again, because there is this 6-month requirement prior to submitting your application, if it's not clear, it may fail their test. They may say this, it's not clear that, maybe this was just adopted by the board yesterday, in which case it is not sufficient to satisfy that requirement. So just make sure that there is a copy that is, endorsed signed by the board chair or secretary with a date that it is officially passed by the board. Whatever documentation, whenever the CDFI fund is asking for board approved documentation, the copy that you have, you should have a copy that is authorized, that has evidence of the date that the board adopted whatever policy or statement or procedure that is. Beginning on page 39, page 93, I'm sorry, page 93 of the guidance begins the discussion of the third element of the primary mission test. Now, this, you might say, well, we already said we have a primary mission that has to be board approved. This is another document that requires board approval. It's a community development strategy, and it can come in a couple of different ways. It can be part of your strategic plan, and if it is part of an existing strategic plan, you want it to be as clearly labeled as possible that this is your community development strategy. Your strategic plan will undoubtedly have lots of different components, but for this particular review, you would want to have a section that is clearly labeled community development strategy, and then touches on these bullet points. It describes the geographic area, the kinds of markets served by the entities, and again, very, very helpful to incorporate language that's easy for the CDFI fund to understand. If your credit union is serving investment areas, don't be shy about using that term. Talk about, where there are concentrations of investment areas. If, you are certified to serve low income targeted populations, use the term, low income. How are you planning on serving your lower income, lower wealth members? And be as specific as possible, as is the case in all strategic plans. The more you can have kind of quantitative indicators, the better. And if it's not part of an existing strategic plan, the CDFI fund does allow you to have a strategic narrative, some other kind of standalone documentation that says these are, our strategic objectives in, for community development over the next 3 years or 5 years, whatever it is. Make sure again that is board approved, and that narrative statement should also kind of hit on each of these 3 bullet points. The fourth element of the primary mission test is responsible financing practices. And this begins on the bottom of page 93 of the guidance. This new edition, this was never part of really the certification process in the past. This has undergone the most extensive review and revision through the 7 years that the CDFI fund has been working on developing on these new standards. And this is one of the areas that I think we've probably gotten the most kinds of comments and questions on. It's raised a number of concerns. So let's just look at what is in the standards and, what is not in the standards. The responsible financing test includes 3 of what the CDFI fund has termed bright line practices that would render an applicant ineligible for certification. Now, some of you may remember when they released a draft for comment, a draft of the new standards at the end of 2022, there were 8 bright line practices. Those have now been reduced to 3 in response to comments and concerns that were raised by the field. So the first originates or offers loans that exceeds the interest rate limits that apply to non-depository institutions in the state where the borrower resides. The second is consumer loans that allow for an APR in excess of 36% and meets all of those subsequent criteria. So it's not just that you offer a consumer loan that allows for an APR in excess of 36%. You have to do that and have an annual default rate over 5%, include a leverage payment mechanism, and on and on. So, offering a product that meets all of those criteria would render an institution ineligible for CDFI certification. And the final one is offers covered single family owner occupied residential mortgage loans secured by non-subordinate lien. So those are the three bright line tests. The maximum interest rate when it's referred to in these guidelines is the military annual percentage rate, the MAPR. So, when you're looking at 36% and saying, well, we don't have any loans, remember there is an incorporation of some fees, some charges that would be calculated in the MAPR calculation. So, to see if you have any loans that might fall into that category, be sure that you are using the MAPR calculation. And for small business loans, the APR is calculated according to the standards in the Truth in Lending Act. So just be aware of those requirements for your CDFI application when you're responding to these questions on responsible financing practices. There's a second element of kind of a key element to responsible financing practices that are, some of these are things that used to be in their list of bright line tests, and then they moved them to this category that just says, well, if you answer affirmatively that you have a product in this category, it will require a supplementary narrative. So it's not an automatic disqualifier by any means. And, these include, for example, small business loans in excess of 36%. What was I looking? Oh, the last one in these four categories: charges excessive overdraft or NSF fees, or has practices related to these fees that are harmful. So there is a question: do you charge overdraft fees? And then a series of follow-up questions. Many CDFI credit unions do charge overdraft fees. This is, a matter of huge discussion. There is plenty of evidence of, overdraft courtesy pay programs that can be quite harmful to consumers. We also know there are many CDFI credit unions that have built their programs and charge their fees with consumer protections, front and center, and continue to offer these and believe very strongly in the value of these practices to their members. Wherever you fall on that spectrum, just be aware, if you do charge overdrafts or NSF fees, there will be questions, and you just have to explain in your narrative how your program is designed, what consumer protections are in place, because there will be a series of required questions related to that. Again, this is not an automatic disqualifier for certification. It is just the kind of thing that requires a little bit more explanation. Whoops, before we talk about accountability, I think I'm supposed to stop there for a second. And
Carrie, for the pause. I do know we had a question that came in about just that we're talking about somebody's current mission statement as opposed to new mission statement. So can you clarify just like maybe bits of that process, if it's like they're looking at their current mission statement and maybe like what they need to do to approach that?
sure, what I would suggest is look at your current mission statement, in whatever form that takes. And again, you need some board evidence that this has been formally adopted by your board of directors. So if you have a, you know, document that has a statement of mission or purpose, look at what the CDFI fund is expecting to see in that. And if you look at it and say, we're fine, then you don't need to come up with something new. There is no need to develop a new statement for your certification application. If you feel that it's adequate for what the CDFI fund is in many credit unions I know have very strong statements of purpose and mission that align very well with what the CDFI fund is looking for. So if you've got that, great. No need to do something new. If you look at it and say, it's not as strong as it could be, or, it may not be interpreted the way, like we know what it means, but maybe the language isn't clear enough, then it might be good just to, have a, like work on it a little bit, have a longer statement. Maybe, you need a board document that kind of has the mission statement. And you see this sometimes where the mission statement is just like one sentence, but the formal mission has, sometimes paragraphs of explanation about this is what we believe in, this is our mission and vision and purpose. You might need to flesh it out a little bit and get the board to adopt that.
Great, Terry, thanks for that. And that was coming from Elizabeth Patrick, and she just had a follow-up. If their board approval was in 2015, she would still have to provide the approval, correct? Which that is that supplemental documentation around the date, right? Yeah. So the answer to that, Elizabeth, is yes. All right. Any other questions before we transition into the accountability section? I want to make sure that we're addressing those. Okay, we have a couple. Do you have a sense of the unacceptable threshold of overdraft NSF fees?
There are, if you look in the guidance, again, beginning on that responsible practices page, it takes you into the application itself. And it will, I can't remember it, verbatim. So that's why it's really good to look. And it will first say, do you charge, say, overdraft fees? Yes or no. If yes, then you have to answer, it says answer the following questions. And you can see from some of the questions that are, quite specific that, they're asking, can a member be charged, say, more than 12 times in a year? Can the total amount of fees exceed the amount of the loan? So there are certain things that, then if any of those answers are yes, some of those will spur, please explain. So, looking at the details of the way the application is structured, I think that will help give you an idea of what some of their concerns would be about those kinds of products and like what their guidelines, but they do not have, kind of second level bright line saying, if you go over this, boom, this is an automatic disqualifier. The only automatic disqualifiers are those first three. And after that, there is some discretion that the CDFI fund will be exercising, but they haven't really released anything more specific than what's in the guidance.
And just to note that in the guidance document on page 97 is where it starts laying out the questions that are in AMIS and the structure of what those are. So you can find those on page 97. All right. And then Martha put in the chat, hi Martha, thanks for joining us. If the primary mission does not include all 7 requirements, when does the 6-month begin and end?
The 6 months minimum counts back from the date of your certification application. So if you're putting, getting your board to approve a fresh mission statement or an update to your mission statement or whatever it is, that would need to be approved 6 months prior to the date of submitting your new certification application. So for currently certified CDFIs, you're aware that you need to submit your new certification application no later than December 20th. So, if you were going right up to the last minute, you would need to have this document in place no later than June 20th.
And it looks like we've got one more question in the chat coming in from Vicky. The bright line around the consumer loan over 36%, do you understand if they charge that and any one of the bullet list, i.e. over 36% and over 5% default is a bright line question mark?
It's 36% and I'm not sure I understand the question, but it's 36% and, above 36% and the sub bullets after that.
Okay. Oh, and any of the
Oh, I see what you're saying. And any one of the, it's not particularly clear. But I would be concerned if it was, like, I would look at those sub bullets. I don't have them all committed to memory, but if you do have a product that's above 36% and any one of those sub bullets, yeah, you should probably follow up with the CDFI fund to ask, but it could be a concern.
All right, thanks, Terry. All right, folks, we are going to hit pause on our recording and then we will start again. So let me hit the stop button here.